It is another edition of the On the Mic podcast, and we're stepping away and out of the MMA world, and we're going back to my first love. For those of you who have followed me forever, you know, sports radio, football, and the NBA are my one true loves, and I'm always open about mental health. And today, that brings my guest. He is got the #1 new release on Amazon, The Ultimate Comeback. He holds the single season Bears passing yard record, the only playoff win in Detroit Lions in modern history, the one and only Erik Kramer. Thank you for joining me.
Mike, I appreciate it. This has been a pleasure being on with you. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I am going to have football questions for you because I think here in the NFC North and in the Midwest, there's plenty to talk to someone like yourself about. But I have, especially on my social media, never been afraid to share things about mental health and the struggles. I've never truly opened up about my own. I've just always shared them. I'll start with this before we get into the book. When you were playing, how closed off was mental health?
Well, it's interesting that you asked that because when this couple years ago, not a couple years ago, this past year, I was at the Radio Row for Super Bowl, and there was after I was done playing for about 10 years. I was with Fox, and one of the people that I worked with was Laura Oakman. And so Laura was there also. She had arranged for me to be interviewed by a group of young women she mentors. The little group's called Galvanize. And she had me be interviewed by Brian Urlacher's daughter. And so interview went great. And as she and I are talking, because she and I did a Radio Row back at one of the Super Bowls, and she goes, "This is interesting how, Erik, when you were playing, the two terms that never went together were mental and health, and yet," she goes, "here you are talking about it, and exclusively to almost." And so when you ask your question, there was no such thing. And I remember going, when I was in Detroit, I got in touch with somebody named Kevin Wildenhouse. And Kevin was just a therapist, but he was an exquisite listener. And he and I worked on how to this mindfulness training, which I had never heard of, and a way of kind of painting word pictures, right, to kind of get yourself to calm down, and so that you could function. And this is 1990. I was on injury reserve. I was only practicing, and yet during that time, I just had a hard time slowing things down. And so that was my first introduction into the world of therapy at all. And so Kevin and I have remained friends, ever since.
That's beautiful. And I wouldn't say in preparation of our interview, but just by happen chance today, I finally watched the documentary on Barry Sanders on Amazon Prime today. And the back of my mind, I'm like, everyone's like, oh, well, that's just Barry. No one ever really dug in, it's just, no, he just wanted to leave, and that's just one of those things that leads me to my next question. Now that you are such an advocate for mental health, and your book, The Ultimate Comeback, Surviving a Suicide Attempt, Conquering Depression, and Living with a Purpose, written by you and William Croyle, which everyone can get on Amazon. Do you hear from your peers, those that either you played with or played against, that hear your story now and go, you've helped me?
Yeah, definitely. There's a friend of mine, Brock Miller, who I played college football with and at NC State. And so I had sent him one. And the other night, I'm watching some Netflix show, and I get this text. And it's Brock saying, basically, he goes, I've never read one book in my life cover to cover, like in one sitting. And he goes something to the effect of, I always knew and respected you for what I knew that who you were and what you did. I had no idea all this other stuff was going on at the same time. And so anyway, believe me, he's not the first and not the only, but I just use that as an example of, yeah, I mean, my first bout with depression came in 1994 while playing for the Bears. And so I had somebody who at that time, we just talked about this yesterday. She was at that time, Griffin, my son's preschool teacher. And she helped out and was in our house at times. And she goes, this is yesterday. Erik, I had no idea this was going on. And so I said, you are uniquely qualified to even say that. So, and I say that not in a good way. I say that in a way that, this is what happens is, and not in a good way, is that eventually when you feel you don't have an outlet, you shrink your own world so that you are your only counselor, which couldn't be. That's the disease. That is, it knocks out all perspective you have on the world in general. And you begin living through the eye of a keyhole. And it's not a good place to be at all. And so obviously the better place to be is where, before any of that even happens, you have a select group of little home team people. When I say little, I mean, it doesn't have to be a large number. I mean, it could be 1, 2, 3, whatever. People that you look up to and admire the certain traits that you yourself admire in others. And at this age, I'm 59. So what I'm going to think of as great quality characteristics in people is going to be different from a 10-year-old's. But 10 years old is where it should start. Yes. And so that's the program that I'm helping to get going here.
You said 94. Do you remember that first bout with depression, and how did you recognize it right away?
Yeah, there's no mistaking it, because it basically, it's not like, oh, I've had someone ask me is this something you could ignore? Or say, oh, it'll get better tomorrow. No, that doesn't happen that way. It's not like a physical person that you're fighting against. It's more like you're enveloped in something that you don't even see. And you have no, it's a fog. It's just a steady fog that you can't see out of. Imagine driving your car at night. I don't care what kind of headlights you have. You can't see 6 inches in front of your car. What are you going to do? Keep driving? No, you're going to stop. So that's what you are. You are stuck in neutral. Actually, worse than neutral, because your thoughts actually drive you below the surface.
I got to ask you just straightforwardly, what led you to write the book, to share your story? Because as I shared with you, this is going to be the first time I've ever said it on camera, I've also had my own attempt to not be here anymore. And it wasn't that long ago, just a few years ago. And again, now a couple of years later, I'm finally saying it. Those around me that needed to know have known for quite some time, but I couldn't. And I went from that to coming out and trying to resume normal life. And then, covering mixed martial arts where people are getting in the cage and punching each other, and they go through some of the worst mental health and addictions and everything. So for me, I just kind of put the blinders on. Why was it important for you to write this book and share your story?
Well, I think in its own way, it was I didn't know this until I started it, but it was a bit cathartic in that, because Bill Croyle, or William Croyle, um, uh, he had actually reached out to Anna Durgan, who's somebody who's been looking after me during this period of time. There was an article written by Dan Wetzel, who writes for Yahoo Sports, and Bill read that article, and then he kind of traced me backward, and so he actually, Anna was quoted in there more than I was, and so he got in touch with her somehow, and very deferentially asked her, would I be interested in collaborating on a book together? And I didn't know him, you know what I mean? He's literally out of the blue. And so eventually I got in touch with him, and I asked him, I said, I think Bill had written, I don't know, I think he's written 11 or 12, 13 books, something like that. And I said, is there one you could, I'd love to read one. And so he wrote a book called Angel in the Rubble. And it was a book on the woman who was the last survivor of the 9/11 attacks. And I could tell within the first couple of paragraphs, I think he knows what he's doing here. And so anyway, it's just, it kind of went from there. And there's a little bit of everything in this book. It goes through, some of my, or not some, but it goes through my emotional healing journey with both of my parents. It's got both Griffin and Dylan, Griffin's younger brother. It's got some football stuff, which if you're not a football fan, and I've had a friend, she goes, I could care less, and I don't even know what we're talking about now with football. Okay, great. That's some people do actually like that. So, and it's got, of course, it deals with depression and how it affected me, and yet here I am today, having and when I say today, for years now, many, like when my feet hit the floor in the morning, I'm looking forward to that day, start to finish, and it's every day. And so there's a lot in there, and so I'm happy of the reactions that I've gotten from the people who seem to know me best.
I would say those are the ones that we definitely want to hear more from about you. And as much as this is an interview for the public, it's also therapeutic for me to talk to someone like you. And I think whether it's just you answering my question that could help 50 people, or maybe, as you know, in the world of mental health, maybe it helps one person,
right.
Whether that be me or someone listening. When you lost Griffin, your son, to a heroin overdose, I lost a very dear friend of mine at only 25 to an overdose. I still to this day carry it with me. At what point, and maybe do you have the moment where instead of remembering them, you're living for them, where you kind of close, you never forget them, obviously, but you have to live for them and not act out, as I was very early on, making all the wrong decisions because, well, no one understands. I just lost my best friend at 25. You don't understand. You can't tell me how to feel or how to act. How did you get through that? And what steps did you take?
Mike, it's that sort of thing now, as you know, as a parent anyway, it kind of hit me like a elevator that I was standing underneath of that had broken free of the cables. And so it flattened me in a way that I can't even, I have nothing to compare it to. And so that went on for quite a while. That was the day that my broadcasting career ended. And and it was hard to function for a while. It's hard to get out of bed, and it was a sadness that I don't really have an association with anymore, because it just flattens you. But it wasn't depression, and two distinctly different states of being. And so I just think you get through it one day at a time, and with the help of others. There was a friend of mine who, you don't know where I live, but I live at the time I was living in a place called Agoura Hills, which isn't far from where I live now. And a friend of mine who obviously knew the scenario, he says, "How far do you live from Oaks Christian?" And I go, "It's actually right down the street from my house." He goes, "We have a guy that works for our company that lives out near you, and his daughter passed away. And he goes, I would just like you two to meet." I said, "Okay, great." The next day or the day after, I'm sitting there, because when I wasn't home by myself. So the next day I'm sitting there and I'm eating breakfast, and there was a knock at the door. And I opened the doors. I didn't recognize him. He goes, "Hi, my name is Mark Davis." That was Mark Davis. And today, Griffin is buried about 30 feet from his daughter, Hannah.
Wow.
And so, you know, I will say this, over the course of time, when bad things happen, angels pop up out of the blue. And so it's been that way all the way through. It wasn't like Griffin tried heroin on a Thursday and Friday he had an overdose. Griffin had been in treatment since his early on in his 10th grade year of school. So he went to an inpatient program that day, and was there for about, I think, 90 days, 3 months, something like that. And then he transferred from the Visions place to outpatient. And that was where he lived at home, but was virtually there all day and into the evening. And so this Griffin's, he was 18 at the time. And this had happened when, not long after the outpatient program had ended. And so I could see that this transformation of Griffin internally was starting to take place, meaning when the outpatient program began, they would have like a parent night, right? Once a week you could come, and it was just the kids, and it was led by one of the counselors there. And it was really like parents to sit and observe. And it was the kids talking. And I was amazed at how insightful, it was just how insightful they all are. And I remember during that time, it went from, "Mom and Dad, thank you for getting me here, because otherwise I would have been, dead or in jail," to, toward the end, "Oh, that was just brainwashing." Well, okay, no, it wasn't. And so I could see he had a finish line sort of in place. And that's where it's, you can't look backward, meaning Griffin's not going to wake up tomorrow. And so I try to live moving forward in ways that will honor not only him, but Dylan too. And so that's kind of the genesis of, eventually, after talking to Bill Croyle, I thought, you know what? This is a really good way to honor Griffin's legacy and memory at the same time of propelling Dylan forward. So this is basically a letter. This book is first and foremost a letter to Dylan.
And I think it's beautifully done after, seeing it for myself. Once again, The Ultimate Comeback with you and William Croyle on Amazon. Everyone can get it, whether paperback or Kindle. And, my last one on this, because I do want to talk football with you, but having been there and countless others who have been there, you have a moment, yours much more, in a sense, you don't want to ever compare situations, right? But, using a weapon as you did, there was a moment of this is the last day to now, as it's said in your book repeatedly, a rebirth. When you can you kind of put into words how you go from this is it, last day, to every day, like you said to me earlier, every day I'm thankful and I'm having a rebirth?
So how it goes from that, I don't quite know. Because kind of as with Griffin, long before that day, which I believe was August 18th, 2015, long before that day, I had been in somewhat of a downward spiral. And part of that spiral, some of that time in there, I don't remember. Like, I don't remember thoughts I had. I don't remember events that occurred. People told me, here's what happened. And that's before August 18th, 2015. And for probably, 2 or 3 years afterward. I mean, I have bits and pieces, but I don't have a full memory. But that's okay. And because I think from generally speaking, when I became somewhat coherent, I don't even remember, I have no association with being depressed, zero. So here's an example that there was eventually, I went to Northridge Hospital. That's where I was taken to initially. And then I spent I don't have any recollection of that. I spent a couple weeks at UCLA, but I only know that because I was told that. And then I go to a place called CNS, which is Center for Neuroskills. And it's a brain rehab center, which I didn't even know they exist. Where it is, I've driven by a million times in my life, never knew that was what that was. I didn't even know there was such a thing. And so Anna, who was looking after me like daily, she would hear me on the phone talking to people like, hey, this is a great place I'm at, but I just don't know why I'm here. I shot myself in the head. That's why I'm here. And yet I didn't know that. And I'm talking, we're a year or more into this. And so it's just an unbelievable transformation. But I have to tell you, I've never been more grateful in my life that transformation has occurred.
I can tell you personally, and I'm not just brown nosing, that I'm thankful it happened, because here we are having this conversation, which has been more than therapeutic for me. We talked yesterday, we said it was going to be impactful, and it definitely has been. Before I get into football, I would just like to say to you, thank you for opening up and having this conversation. I commend now the NFL for, their monthly campaign of men's mental health, and, having the players come out and saying, it's actually manly to speak up.
Right.
And I do think, that is a big credit to someone like yourself. Football is not who you are. It's just what you did for a period of time. And on a way more lighter note, I'm going to start, if I can steal you for a few extra minutes to talk some football.
Of course.
Having played in both Detroit and Chicago, I'm going to start with the hard-hitting question. You played with Barry and you played in the city that Walter Payton graced. You know where this is going.
Of course.
Are they the two best running backs you've ever seen?
Let me answer that by saying, first of all, yes, but there's a scenario I'd like to paint. One is that a friend of mine that I played in Detroit with, Roman Fortin, he played center. And I think he played, I don't know, most of his career in Atlanta. And we played together again in San Diego with the Chargers my last year. And Roman was over the house one day, and Griffin's favorite human being who ever lived was Walter Payton, like not even close.
Like so many people.
Okay. And he, this is because now Griffin was probably, oh, I'm going to say he was probably maybe 8, 9-ish, and him and Walter would come and hang out with him like outside the locker room after games, and so Roman is telling Dylan, oh no, Barry's by far the best, and they're going back and forth, and finally Roman goes, Griffin, I'm just going to put it this way: if Barry and Walter were on the same team, Walter never would have saw the field. Griffin's like, what? But I will say this: two completely different types of runners, completely different. Because the big at that time, it was Emmett and Barry Sanders and Emmett. And again, two completely different types of runners. I'm not sure Barry ever would have plowed it up in there to gain 2 yards. Like it didn't happen in 10 years. So why would it happen all that, at that time?
Right.
And so, but for what he did, I don't think I've ever seen anybody even come close to that. You know how they have the top 10 lists of everything having to do with the top 10 coaches, top 10, and they'll get, they'll mix it in with comedians. They'll be on there talking. And one guy goes, they could have the top 10 runs of all time, and all 10 would be Barry Sanders. And he's probably right. But he's not, they weren't the type where he was running over people. He would go 1 on 11 and make all 11 miss.
But he wouldn't plow through like Walter.
No.
One thing I love that I'm sure you recognize as well, one thing they definitely have in common, after every big play, they just hand the ball to the ref.
Right. Here's one thing I never saw Barry do, ever, is run out of bounds. Never saw him get run out. I never saw him get tackled, though, between the numbers and the sideline.
You know what?
He would get bumped and end up out of bounds, but I never saw anybody tackle him between the numbers and the sideline.
That right there, what you just said, right after this interview, I'm actually going to see my uncle, who I'm going to use one of his questions he told me to ask you, because we watch every Bears game that we can together, and he remembers you very much so. But every single Bear, we're in 2023, and he's still to this day, when sports gambling is a thing and he wants to see a player get an extra yard, he goes, guys like Barry and Walter would never run out of bounds. So you saying that, he's like, see, I told you. And to kind of piggyback off that, his question that I'm going to steal from him, we're talking about the Chicago Bears, the vaunted long history of the Chicago Bears, and you hold a single season passing record to this day. What does that mean to you?
Well, it means I was a part of history of one of the best teams, franchises ever, one of the original ones. And however, having said that, I take great pride in being a part of that team and some of the things we were able to do. However, I'm as frustrated as everyone else in that why so far back, and yet there hasn't been anybody kind of step up and keep it going. I don't understand that.
I think that is I'm 31 years old. I think that is the long burning question in my entire life of being a Chicago Bears fan. Could you kind of speak to what it's like to have such a historic franchise, and there's one consistent? It's not winning. It's when will they find their answer at quarterback? It's been that way my entire life.
And I would agree with you. I don't have the answer for why that is, but I do have a feeling that they're going to get that solved this next time around. I really do. I personally don't think you have to draft Patrick Mahomes too. I don't think you have to draft pick a guy and whoever's at the top of your list, put him up there. The Bears don't need that guy. What they do need is a solid decision maker who can deliver the ball accurately, somewhat athletic. If he's athletic, great. But someone who can anticipate throws, move defenders, and just be consistent. That's it. And it's not complicated. And what I think the Bears, like if I was Ryan Poles, who by the way, I think I love everything that guy's done. And it's also the first time in my lifetime that the Bears have actually, the McCaskey family has actually turned the reins over to someone who really does know what he's doing. And so you give him one more draft, which I would say trade out of that number one spot and trade down and you find the most elite something, left tackle, edge rusher. You start playing Javon Dexter in the right position, which is a 3 technique. And you add more, the right free agents and trade for someone else potential. I mean, the roster is going to improve. My question is the right coaching staff in place? I have a hard time believing that it is.
I think Monday night against the Minnesota Vikings was a telling tale of this coaching staff. I understand Brian Flores in Minnesota likes to blitz, but to run 13 or 17 screen passes, 3 of which came consecutively on the same drive, I mean, that's beyond frustrating. So a couple things I want to pick off of what you just said. Number one, my question is, you said they don't need to draft the next Patrick Mahomes. Maybe they should trade out of that number 1 pick, which many believe will be Caleb Williams out of USC. Is Justin Fields the guy to take the Bears to the next level?
No, not in my opinion. But I'm not associated with any of the draft process. But I don't think he is. But I think somebody like a J.J. McCarthy or a Bo Nix or I would say no on Michael Penix. I would say no on I can't remember who else is out there right now.
We got Drake May out of North Carolina.
Drake May, I haven't seen enough of, although I played against his dad, Mark. And so Mark was a really good, he was probably one of the best quarterbacks in the country coming out of college or high school. And then he injured, I think, his elbow or shoulder. But even after that, he was still good. And then, of course, Drake's brother, is it Luke May, right? The basketball player?
Yeah.
So those guys, that family, they are just smart players. And I know that guy's got it figured out, Drake May. So he might be a guy. But I still think if it was me, I would still want to go down like, you can play and win with Tyson Bagent. So the rush is over. So get somebody like that doesn't necessarily have to start right away. And Tyson Bagent would be just fine, trust me. And let someone come in and learn as you go. And because there's going to be a lot of new talent that's not even here yet. And if you get the right coaching staff in place, then there's no reason the Bears can't be the next Lions.
Yeah,
no reason whatsoever. And if you think about the cast off that Jared Goff was coming from LA, he was the guy that everybody in America who pays attention at all to football knows there's one reason the Rams lost the Super Bowl to the Patriots. Not two reasons. One, his name was Jared Goff. And he goes from there to a resurgent Jared Goff, which is why the Rams drafted him in the first place. So I love his story. And even though he was the number 1 overall pick, he's not athletic in the least. But he's a good decision maker. And he does things that just Tyson Bagent does. There's, to me, between those two, there's not a vast chasm. I mean, Tyson Bagent could work his way up into that category within a year, no doubt. So that's what I'm saying. You don't need the next greatest, thing that someone's projecting to be the next best. You don't. You need a solid decision maker that can deliver the ball accurately, anticipate throws, and that's what you need.
Well, just a few more if you don't mind, and I appreciate that. I've got one way out of left field here, and I'm basing it off of where we currently stand going into Week 14 in the draft projections, and that is probably the worst time of Bill Belichick's coaching career in New England. And we all know him as the madman. with New England sitting at the number 2 pick, if someone in the Bears front office listens to this, tell them, one, give me a job. Two, also, there's Bill Belichick, who needs to right the ship after losing Tom Brady. But we know he likes to be coy. The Bears hold all the chips currently with that number 1 pick. Could you see Bill Belichick trying? Because the problem is, you just mentioned it. Finally, the Bears have the right people running operations. Should they hold that pick for ransom? Because Bill Belichick's pretty desperate. He could say, all right, it's fine. I don't want Caleb Williams. I'll wait and take Drake May, or we'll go draft Marvin Harrison Jr., and I'll find a quarterback in the 3rd round. I found one in the 6th round back in 2000. Should the Bears hold it like it's a $1 billion check?
Yes, absolutely. Because, like, talk about it. Do we even know if Belichick's going back to New England, first of all?
No.
I don't think anybody does. Now, if you want to check somebody's draft history, check his in the last 5 years. Tell me one guy who pops to the top of your head, like, what a great draft pick that was. There isn't one. And so who knows, he'll screw up that pick. And hell yeah, the Bears should hold on to that. Like, because there's 2, by the way, that they've got.
Yeah. Yes.
And so there's a lot can be said that the Bears will not only hold the number 1, they could hold the number 2 or 3.
Yep.
When all this is said and done. And so the last time I remember the Bears having 2 back-to-back first-round picks, one guy was named Sayers, the other guy was named Buckus, and that turned out okay.
Yeah.
So, I think there's more value in trading down to acquire more potential Marvin Harrison type players or edge rusher type players, or, I think Braxton Jones has quietly at left tackle gone. He has had the best 1-year transformation I've ever seen, ever. And he went from a sheet blowing in the wind at left tackle last year to now he can anchor. Apparently he's worked some with Olin Kreutz and he's gotten stronger. But the problem there is that you're going to face every single week that team's most elite player. And so having your own elite player there and Braxton Jones as a swing tackle, now you're talking. And now you're building the kind of depth that the teams like the Eagles and the 49ers and the upper echelon teams have, is depth. Not just superstars, but depth for superstars.
You mentioned coaching staff, and I read something recently that kind of put this rumor a little on the back burner, but the big new rumor is someone who's also connected to the Chicago Bears franchise, and that's the man leading the University of Michigan right now, Jim Harbaugh, possibly coming back. But then there's some reports saying he wouldn't come back because of his relationship with Kevin Warren and during their time in the Big Ten, and that's fractured. Would Jim Harbaugh be the guy you'd like to see the Bears go get?
It's funny. Like, I remember when he first got into coaching, and he was my roommate when I went to San Diego with the Chargers and in training camp. And so in every meeting, there was one guy who had nothing to say about anything, suggestion-wise or anything, and it was Jim Harbaugh. And if you talk to any players that played with him, I don't know him from his days at Michigan, but if you talk to anybody that played with him at the Bears, he's the last guy anybody would thought would be a football coach. Yet he's been successful everywhere he's been, everywhere. So I think he would be a great hire for the Bears. And because he does one thing really well, he does a lot of things well, but one in particular is that dude is committed to running the ball down your throat all game, every game. And if there's one team that historically knows how to do that, it's this one. And if it's also one team that historically doesn't know how to coach that week in and week out, which is this one. So I think that we all know that there's value. Just look at the 49ers. Just look at teams that can run the ball, committed to it. It destroys a defense, because what happens next? you get the play action game, you get the receiver screen game, where it's not just receiver screen, receiver screen, receiver screen. It's actually fake something over here, receiver screen, because that already worked 2 plays earlier. And I love that, Jim Harbaugh could potentially be that guy. He's got some roots in Chicago, obviously. And whatever you're saying about Kevin Warren, I don't know that. But I just think that, if this organization ever needed somebody that has kind of rocket fuel behind them, this would seem to be the perfect match.
Yeah, and I don't write the reports. I just read them and then speculate if they're true or not. I do want to ask you about the team up north, the Detroit Lions that you played with. So some like myself would say, unfortunately. But when you talk about Jim Harbaugh, I sense the amount of respect you have for him. So I can only imagine your answer here. How great, not for the franchise, not just for the people inside the building, but how great for the city of Detroit has Dan Campbell been?
So last year, I called up Chris Spielman, and at the time they were like, I don't know, 1-3, 1-4. And I go, how is it you guys are actually looking so good? And he goes, this coaching staff is ridiculous. So good in a way, in the way he's talking about it. And so, yes, I've never met Dan, but I would love to, only in the sense that I'd love to tell him how good a job he looks to be doing from the outside. And I'm sure everybody tells him that anyway. But it truly does look like from top to bottom, this organization knows what's going on. And for many, many years, as you know, these two franchises have mirrored each other in mediocrity. And yet, this last hire they made between Brad Holmes and as a GM and Dan Campbell, and I think getting Chris Spielman on board to be sort of the as I understand it, kind of liaison between ownership and general manager and coaching staff. I think that whole infrastructure that they've built it's flawless. And right now, I mean, do they have the best roster in the NFL? No. Do they have a guy that can win instantly rushing the passer? No. Does anybody on their team stand out as that's the best guy in the NFL at what he does? No. But as a team, they're freaking hard to beat. And you got to be on your best game a lot and have a lot of bounces go your way. They just lost a couple games in a row and didn't look good doing it. Well, guess who didn't lose the next week? And so the fact that they're now playing this weekend, it's kind of, this is going to be a good test for for the Bears that, I don't see 38 receiver screens going to get it done this week. I don't.
No. When they play each other, where does your heart lie?
So getting asked this by everybody, I've always been that I'm twice a year, I root for two teams and on the same day. And so, as you know, not everybody's, that doesn't work for everybody.
No, it doesn't.
So but when you mentioned Detroit and how bad they've been hungry for this. So I go back to both teams, homecoming games, and went back there this year to watch so I'm a Charger season ticket holder. So I went to the Sunday night game where they just got absolutely, I want to say the Bears, got absolutely obliterated by what would you call it, mediocre Chargers team at best. Get on a red eye, go to Detroit and watch the Raiders game with Detroit on Monday night. And you talk about, when you go to Charger games now, every game they play at home technically is an away game. Every game. So I'm not sure I saw a Raiders jersey in Ford Field. Like, it was deafening in a way that reminds me of that 91 or whatever it was, 92 team that we played Dallas in the Silverdome. And it was, I've never been in a stadium that has been like as loud for as long as it was that night. And that just tells me how, again, these two teams and these two cities and these two franchises, they're mirrored of each other. Like, could you imagine if the Bears suddenly started out a season 9-3? The
No.
place would be, before they ever got to 9-3, they'd be 6-2. At that point, the place would erupt. That's what Detroit is like right now. And so, and I don't say that just, I don't like, I'm not just rooting for the Lions this year. I root for them every year. And it just seems like now they finally got what I think the Bears have. It's just, they're a year behind.
Hopefully that year behind stops. And I'm going to come full circle with all this, and then we'll plug the book again. And I'll thank you again for giving me extra time. We see shows like Hard Knocks, which has been around for a while now. We have the ever-growing power of social media. And as we both mentioned, you see the NFL taking a little more attention, a lot more attention compared to back in your playing days, to mental health and everything. Do you like to see players, not, I won't say under the spotlight, but we're getting more of a look inside players' lives? You know, on Hard Knocks, we get to see their wives, we get to see them at home interacting with their kids. And sometimes we see the worst of the worst. You know, I know this year for Hard Knocks fans, you know, Robert Saleh of the Jets said, I'm not showing anything bad. I don't want you guys showing when we have to cut people. I don't want anything like that. So instead, they fake cut Xavier Gibson. He thinks he's going to get cut. Then he's the Monday night hero the same night Aaron Rodgers goes down. I think it's beautiful. Do you, as someone who now advocates for mental health and just life after sports, do you like seeing so much attention into the personal lives?
I do. I'm like everybody. I mean, and Netflix has a show called Quarterback.
Yeah.
I've seen, 3 or 4 times, and I love that. And I think that it's kind of the way TV's going, right? And so it's not just pick a sport, but it's I think it's very interesting when you get to see not only what goes on the field, but you see the buildup to what goes on the field and the aftermath of what goes on the field, and how some people can literally walk off the field and it's over, and other people walk off the field and it's just beginning. And so I was like that for much of it. And so it's something that you kind of carry around with you wherever you go. And so anyway, I enjoy that part of it. And to answer your question specifically, I do really admire the NFL and other pro sports, and really society in general, for getting on board that if you break an ankle, if you break a leg, you're going to go to the doctor. Well, just because mental health isn't something you can see, why isn't it as important? And the question there is, it is. The answer is, it is as much, or if not more, important. And being able to kind of look at your life as a person in that way, in a proactive way especially, is the way to kind of keep yourself and those around you on track.
You told me this was going to be impactful. So as I bid you farewell, I just want to say thank you. And it's not just for the audience purposes. It's for man to man. Thank you for sharing your story with me. Thank you for helping me. I wasn't even sure I was going to be able to get through it. And we got a little bit of extra time, and I appreciate you for that. I hope, your story serves a purpose, not only to myself, but to many others. But as you know, like we said earlier, if it helps one, it does the job. So thank you. If you're ever in Chicago, I'd love to meet you face to face. Your book, The Ultimate Comeback, with you and William Croyle, on Amazon. #1 under new releases. You can get it on Amazon.com as a Kindle or as a paperback. I can't wait to get my own copy. I just can't say thank you enough.
Mike, I really appreciate it again. I knew this was going to be good, but it's exceeded my expectations. So thanks for having me on.
Thank you, and I'll be tracking down if you're ever in Chicago for a game.
I will be.
Thank you very much.
All right, Mike. Take care.